Okay, the Gemara is Daf Lamed Hey Amid Aleph. So I just want to just go back to the Mishnah, so we'll get a quick understanding of what we're discussing over here. The Gemara is discussing the strange isser of why cheese of a goy is aser. Well, it's kosher. What should be so? What's the problem? So we go back to the Mishnah Chavtesam and Beis, and there the Mishnah says Sho'al Rabbi Shmuel's Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yeshua when they were walking on the road, and he asked him, Rabbi Yeshua, why did they ask a cheese of a goy? So Rabbi Yishmael says because they curdle the cheese in the stomach of an avela. In other words, the stomach of the nevela after you kill an animal has certain milks in it. Let's say the baby calf was nursing milk from its mother, so it didn't get a chance to digest it all. That liquid somehow, if you add it into cheese, add it into milk, it could turn it into cheese. So now you wouldn't say that's a very strange answer because really that's not nevela. That's like the urine of an animal. Let's say you kill an animal and it has urine inside. Would you say that's usser because there's urine there? Well, of course not, because it's not part of the animal, or any manure is not part of the animal. So that couldn't be what would be the problem if they took that contents from the stomach of the nevela and made cheese from it. And they turned it in, they used it as an agent, a curdling agent to make cheese. Amr loy, so that's what Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yeshua. Even if it was a cavus of an oila, the stomach of an oila, where everything, when you shech the carbon oila, the kohen has to throw everything on the mizbeach. But if there's little like liquid in the stomach of the animal that was a carbon, the kohen can drink it and no problem because it's not part of the animal. So therefore, if it's not part of the animal, it's not a nevela. So it's by the nevela, it's not part of. If it's not part of a carbon oil, it's not part of an nevela. So why can't they make cheese from it? In other words, why can't they take kosher milk and take the contents of a killed animal and use that as to make cheese? So then Rabbi Yeshua answered and said, because they make the cheese by using the contents of the stomach of a calf that was used for an avodah zarah. If they slaughtered a calf for avodah zarah, that contents is aser bahana. That contents is aser because that's part of the avodah zarah, and we'll see in a moment why. Whereas the contents in the stomach of the avela is not part of an avela, the contents of the stomach of a calf that was dedicated for avodah zarah is avodah zarah. So then, if that was the case, then Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yeshua, then why don't they aser it bahana? Because if the agent that's making the cheese is avodah zarah agent, then the whole cheese should be aser bahana. Why is cheese from a goy not aser bahana? Apparently, Rabbi Yeshua did not want to answer this question, and he wanted it to remain silent of why cheese is aser. He turned the conversation into trying to understand the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Ki Tovim Deidechem Yayin, and we'll see more about that in the Gemara. So let's go into the Gemara. Okay, we're starting from Lamed Daled Amud Beis. Amar Rav, about 10 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Achtaboy, Amar Rav. Rav said, Hamakadish, if one betroths a woman, beperish with the excrement, shar haniskal, of a shar that's about to be stoned, why would an ox be stoned? Because it killed a human being, right? And the Bezdin said you have to kill the ox. It's a muad. So if it's a woman, and then it like, it had excrement, and a guy grabs it, and it's Mekadosh Nisha. Now the Shara Niskal is Aser Bahanoah. So you would think the excrement that comes out of it is part of the animal. And it's Mekadosh Nisha with something that's worthless. The answer is no. Mukudeshes. She's Mukudeshes. Beperish Oigla Avodah Zarah, but if it was a calf that was dedicated for Avodah Zarah, and it excreted excrement and used that excrement to Mekadosh and Isha to Ein Mekadeshes, because the Avodah Zarah is also bana, and so is the excrement. So what's the difference? Why? They're both Avodah Zarah and Shar Niskal are both things that are asr bana. So why is the excrement of a Shar Niskal not part of the Shar Niskal, and the excrement of an Avodah Zarah animal is part of the Avodah Zarah animal? So the Gemara says, "Iba yisem svara." If Iba yisem kra, if you want, I can tell you it's a logical reason, and if you want, I can tell you it's a pasuk. Iba yisem svara, I can tell you it's a svara digarisin. Gabe egli avodah zara nichele benifche. A person, a calf of avodah zara, he enjoys that it's bloated, that it's fattened up, so that the manure that's inside the animal is part and parcel of being avodah zara, even though it's not the meat of the animal, but it's part and parcel of an avodah zarah animal, and therefore, it becomes avodah zarah, and therefore you can't be mekadosh nisha. Avodah by shar niskel, then nikale benifche. By shar niskel, he doesn't care about the excrement that's inside of the animal. That's not part of the shar niskel. So if it's excreted, then it's not part of the animal, and one could be mekadosh a woman with that. Iba yasei mekra. If you want, I can see it a pasuk. Ksiv hach, it says in the pasuk, la yidba b'chayatcha uma. It says don't touch anything but that's part of the avodah zarah. Everything that's part of the avodah zarah, the pasuk says is also bahana. Whereas by a shar niskil it says ksiv hasam sokol yisok al shar. You stone the ox v'lo ye'acheles b'sari. Don't eat the meat, right? So we darshan b'sari aser. The meat is aser bahana. All pirshoy, but its excrement mutaris is mutar. It's not part of the animal, and therefore you could be mekadesh a woman with it. So Amar Rava said, Tavaya Tananan. If you learn our Mishnah, that's our Mishnah saying the same idea. And our Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel did not like Rabbi Yeshua's reasoning, and he said that the excrement, you see, the contents in the stomach of the animal is like excrement. And Rabbi Shmuel said to Rabbi Yeshua, if they use the contents of an avela to make cheese, it shouldn't asa the cheese because the contents in the stomach of an avela is not the nevela. So michlal, the isure hana, because something that's asa bahana, sharu pirshaihu, it's permitted the excrement that's inside of it. A carbon oil is asa bahana, and yet the excrement, the stomach contents that's inside of it, is mutter, is not part of the animal. So that's a regular isra no. But when it came to that, but then Rabbi Yeshua says, oh no, because they use egle avodah zara. They don't use egle nevela. They use the contents of the stomach of a calf that was used for avodah zara, and that makes it aser. He said that they use the contents of an animal that was used for avodah zara. And Rabbi Shmuel agreed that's a good answer because the contents of an animal that's used for avodah zara, the stomach contents, becomes part and parcel of the avodah zara itself. So then, if that's the case, he asked him the question, "In came le'yasrua bahana." Why didn't they asr bahana? Michlal, from here you see the avodah zara or also pirshayu, the excrement of an avodah zara is considered part of the avodah zara. So let's review. You have an animal that's a shar niskel, it's asr bahana. The excrement that comes out of it is not part of the animal. It's not asr bahana. One could be mekadesh a woman with it. But on the other hand, if the animal was used for avodah zara, so then the excrement that comes out of it is asr bahana, and you cannot be mekadesh and isha with it. And that's you can see that idea also from a Mishnah. So the Gemara now goes back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yeshua if what you're saying is true, that they make the cheese using the excrement, let's say, of a avodah zara animal. So that's your reason that you're giving me. Then why isn't it asr bahana? And Rabbi Yeshua didn't answer that question. He didn't know. So the Gemara says, then why didn't Rabbi Yeshua answer, because the isser is not existent. When you use as an enzyme as the excrement, the stomach contents of a avodah zara animal to curdle the cheese, it's just a drop. So if the isser is not there, so therefore it could only be asr b'achila, but not asr b'hana. The whole my rice, this fish fat dip that they made, l'rabbanan, that they used to put wine in it, they used to put that flavor of wine in it. The loy asru banot, the rabbis didn't asr bahana. They just had the wine in it to take away the fish smell. My timer, why didn't they aser bahana? The guy is putting in his wine. Lab mishum de leiseli sur because you don't see the wine in the fish dip. It's the taste is there, but it's not the smell is there, but it's not the physical wine is not there. So same thing over here. When you make cheese out of the contents of the inside of a Avodah Zarah animal, that part is not there. You can't see it in the cheese. So maybe that's the reason why it's not Asr Bahana. So the Gemara answers no, because Amre Hacha, in our case by the cheese, Kivin de Oikme Kamoikim. The only thing that makes the cheese, it's an important ingredient. It makes the cheese. And therefore, so we consider it as if the Isser is in existence, as if you can see the Isser. And therefore, the cheese, if it was taka, if they really used the contents of an Avodah Zarah animal, the stomach contents of an Avodah Zarah animal, it would make the cheese Asr Bahano'ah. It would make the cheese. On the other hand, the taste of wine that's used in marais is just as an agent to take away the smell of the fish, but it's not an agent that creates the marais. If you drop the wine, you can still make marais, but if you drop the agent that makes the cheese, you're not going to have cheese. So the Gemara says, for some reason, Rabbi Yeshua did not want to give the reason why they asked for cheese. So he said, "Oh, there's a pasuk, Mai ki tovim de'dechem. What is the meaning of this pasuk? Ki tovim de'dechem. We tell God, your friendship is better than wine. Ki asur Ravdimi Amar. Ravdimi came from Israel, and he said, Amar Knesset Israel lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Jewish nation, Jewish people have one neshama. It's called Knesset Israel, and our one neshama said to the Eibishter, Rabbeinu Shalom. We love the rabbis, the Torah Shabbal Peh, more than actual Torah Shabbat. So we like that. In other words, because without Torah Shabbal Peh, you wouldn't have Torah Shabbat. It wouldn't be in existence. So it would be on the wayside. So that's what we're saying. It's sweet to learn the Torah Shabbal Peh more than to learn Torah Shabbat, which is why people tend to learn Talmud more time, put more time into Talmud than to learning Chumash. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ishna haikra de shaili." Why did he use this pasuk? Rabbi Yeshua used this pasuk for Rabbi Shmuel to push him aside. He wanted to tell him the beginning of the pasuk. Yishakenu min shikas pihu, and Amalei, and he said like this. This is what Rabbi Yeshua said to Rabbi Shmuel. Yishmol achi, Yishmol my brother, chashoik svasecha zu bezu, seal your lips and staple them together, va'al tavar lahashiv, and don't be in a rush to try to figure this out. So again, the Mishnah, that's really what he wanted to tell him. Rabbi Yeshua said to Rabbi Shmuel, please don't ask me why they asked the cheese. I don't want to tell you. So the Gemara says, my Tama, why didn't he want to tell you? It was a brand new law. And we don't want it to be up for discussion. Because if we tell you the reasons, this is somebody you're going to say, oh, this reason doesn't apply, and will not accept the new edict of the Chachamim. So the first, 12 months, they don't tell you the reason. We try to keep the reason hidden, so it will become accepted without question by the rest of Klal Yisrael. So now the Gemara, to the rest of the page, tries to get down, what is the reason? And you're not going to believe what the reason is why we ask cheese. Why can't they go into a Goyish store and buy cheese? If I know cheese can only be made from kosher milk. My gzeirasa, so why did they make a gzeira? They made a gzeira because the milk that they set aside to make cheese, they would leave it uncovered, and it could be a snake came and put his poison there. And that's why and that's why the real reason, according to Rabbi Shua ben Levi, is what the real reasons why we ask a goyish cheese. So the Gemara says v'lei melei mishum nikar. So why didn't he tell him that's the reason that they asked the goyish cheese because of a snake poison? And so the Gemara could do Ula. It's like what Ula said. Ula said ki gzar gzeres b'marava, when they make a law in Eretz Yisrael, lemigalu taima atresi achashata, they wouldn't tell you the reason for the next 12 months. Why? Maybe a person who wasn't there, and he's not gonna, if you tell him that they're not gonna hold of the reason, and he's not gonna keep the edict that the Chachamim said. So Chachamim wanted everybody to accept this law that you shouldn't eat cheese, so they hid the reason. But the real reason, according to Rabbi Shua ben Levi, is because we're concerned that a guy is not careful, and a snake came and put his poison in there. Because of that, Rabbeinu Tam on this page holds that since nowadays we're not concerned about snakes, they don't exist in residential homes, therefore one could eat goyish cheese without a hechsher. That was the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam. It's not accepted, but it's on this page because there are other reasons. Magada bar Rabbi Yirmiyah didn't like this reason. If it's the whole reason is because of snake poison, Elmiat, if that's true, Yivesha, if it's dry cheese, tishtri, you should be permitted to eat it. Yashan, if it's aged cheese, tishtri, it should be permitted. Daram Chinina, Yavesh Muta, Ein Manicha Yabesh. You could always assume that something that dried out is permitted to eat because snake poison will not allow it to dry out. And the fact that it dried out, it must be that there's no snake poison there. Yashan, if it became aged, mutter, you're allowed to eat something like that, even though you assume that there is no poison there, because because the snake poison will not allow it to become aged. The bottom line is that if the wide Chachamim make a gzera across the board, all types of cheeses are asar, when the reality is that if the cheese became aged or became dry, then it would be mutter, because if it was poison in there, it wouldn't it would turn into aged or dried out. Amar Rab Chanina gives another reason. The reason why they asked goyish cheese, lefishi efshalah beloitzich tzuchei chalav. Every cheese has little particles of milk, and we are concerned that from the kosher, the goy mixed in a little tame milk in there. Let's say milk from a behema tamea, and therefore milk from behema tamea will not turn into cheese. Okay, and therefore when they make the cheese, you'll see cheese, but you'll see little particles of milk in there, and that particles of milk might possibly be chalav tame, chalav from an animal from a behema tamea. And milk from like a tiger is aser. Shmuel says no, or kevas nevela. Not that they curdle the cheese and with the skin of the stomach of the nevela, not the contents of the stomach, but the skin of the animal. Hakeva gufa shari, would Shmuel hold that the stomach itself would be permitted? Shmuel explained a Mishnah in Chulin that the Mishnah is saying one idea. Kevas shchitas guy, if a guy slaughtered something, the stomach itself, right? Well, it's nevela. Nevela is asura, and you can't. And if you use it to make cheese, according to this Mishnah, it would aser it because the contents are part of the nevela, according to this Mishnah. So why would Shmuel say that the problem is they use the skin of the animal? Even if they use the contents of the stomach, it would also aser, according to Shmuel's understanding of that Mishnah. So the Gemara says, Loi kasha, that's not difficult, because we already disproved that making cheese from the contents of the stomach of an avela animal, that's not part of an avela. So that would be permitted. But that Mishnah is Kan, we go to Amid Beis, Kan koidim chazara, kan la'achar chazara, u'mishnah loizaz mekama. That's in the beginning. That Mishnah was talking about before Rabbi Yeshua retracted his statement, and he held that the contents of the keves nevela would aser cheese. But our Mishnah is the halacha. The contents of the keves nevela would not aser the cheese. U'mishnah loizaz mekama. They kept that first Mishnah chulam. The bottom line is that that if you use the contents of the keva of the nevela, it wouldn't asa the cheese because that's like using urine. It doesn't asa the cheese. The problem is they use the skin of the animal, the skin, the meat of the animal, of the stomach, and they use that to make the cheese. So that is a problem. And therefore, that's the reason why they asked. Rab Malki Mishmeid Rab Ada Bar Ahava Oma. And Rab Ada Bar Ahava said like this: I know why they asked cheese. Because they smooth the face side of the cheese with the fat of a chazer. So to make maybe the cheese shine, they use pig fat. Rav Chizda Ama Mepnei Shemamidim Oysa B'Choymet. Rav Chizda says because they make the cheese using vinegar that came from wine. So they're using yayin nesach to make the cheese. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Ama Mepnei Shemamidim Oysa B'Sraf Orla. They use the sap of an orla tree, so that would that could make the cheese, but an orla is asur bahana. Kaman kaitana. The Tanya we learned in the Brayso, Rablezo Hamamed B'Srafa Arla. If you make cheese using the sap of an arla tree, also peri, because the sap of an arla tree will make a fruit. So therefore, if you're using cheese to make from the sap of the tree if you use the sap of the tree to make cheese, that would asa the cheese. So is that our Mishnah going according to only Rab Lezer? So the Gemara says not true. Afilu Tamer Rabbi Yeshua. Our Mishnah could go according to Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Yeshua would also hold they would asa cheese. Ad kan the Rabbi Lezer ela bekafta the gavza, the sap of a branch. Aval kafta the peri moide. Rabbi Yeshua would agree that if they use the sap of the fruit itself to make the cheese, he would agree that it's asa. V'hainu Tanan, that's what we learned in the Mishnah. Am Rabbi Yeshua Shemati beferish. I heard explicitly. Shamamid b'srafa ila masafa ikuren muter. If you make the cheese using the sap of the leaves or the sap of the roots, then it's muter. But if you use b'sraf hapagim, if you use the sap of unripe figs, of course, arla figs, asa, neshu peri, using the fruit itself, which is asa ba'ana, to make cheese. So there are two reasons that we just saw that you never knew. The reason why they asked cheese, according to Rav Chizda, was because the guy, to make the cheese, to curdle the cheese, he would use vinegar, which came from wine. That's the ayin nesach. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said that both Rav Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua both would hold that the reason why it's also to use the cheese because they use the sap coming from an orla fruit. So therefore, it would be aser. So the question is, Bein Rav Chizda, Bein Rav Nachman Yitzchak, Titasa Ba'ana. Then if that's the case, if that's our concern, then Goyish cheese should not only be also to eat, but it would be also to benefit from, because they're using Arlo, they're using Yayin Nesach. So Kasha, that's a very good question. Concludes the Gemara, Darash Rav Nachman Reid Rav Chizda, My Diksiv, what does it say in the Pasuk? L'reach shmenecha toivim, that the smell that comes out of your oil is fragrant. So the Gemara says, Darshan, this is a pasuk in Shir Shirim. Lama Talmud Chacham Daima. What is the Talmud Chacham compared to? Litzloicha shla pal yotin. To like a bottle of perfume. Okay, imagine a bottle of perfume. Megula. If it's uncovered, you open it up. Reicha noidif. Then the smell gets dispersed. And therefore, everything smells nicely. Mechusa, but if you keep it covered, ein reicha noidef, then the smell does not spread. And therefore, a Talmud Chacham has to come out of a shell. It can't just be in a library learning all day. He has to come out and teach. Now, a Talmud Chacham would think that if I'm teaching, I'm wasting my time. Just the opposite. Not only that, all of a sudden, things that he couldn't understand, he will be able to understand it. Because things that are covered will be revealed to him. Shenema alamois ahavucha. Whatever is uncovered will be beloved to you. In other words, you'll find things that come to your mind that even you didn't even think about. Not only that, a Talmud Chacham that teaches, his best friend is now the Malach HaMavis. The Malach HaMavis is not going to take his life too early. Shnema al mois havucha. Karibe al mois. The one that's in charge of death will love you and not take your life away. He's going to get two worlds. once this world and once the next world. Shnema, the pasuk says, alumois, karil bay, karibe oilamois. He's getting two worlds, this world and the next world. He'll have a nice life. So, but only if the Talmud Chacham opens his perfume top to let his smell spread out. Another minute, we'll just do the Mishnah and then we'll stop. Mishnah says, "Ve'elu devarim shel goyim asurim, ve'ein isurin israno." The following of from goyim is asur, but it's not asur bahano. So you're not allowed to eat it. A Jew is not allowed to eat it. So cholav shecholov a goy, ve'ein yisrael ra'eu. If you have a cow that was milked by a goy and the Jew doesn't see it, it's asur. And the Gemara is going to explain because we are afraid that maybe without the Jew looking, he mixed in, milk from a pig or milk from a tummy animal. V'hapas v'hashemen shelen. You can't buy bread or buy oil from a goy. Rebbe ubeis dina hitiri hashemen. Rebbe and his bezdin gave permission that you could buy oil from a goy. V'hashalokish. Shalokish is you can't buy cooked foods that were cooked by a goy because of it brings to intermarriage. Ukvashim, and you can't buy pickled items because because they generally put in their wine or vinegar coming from wine, which is yayin nesach. You don't know for sure. That's why it's only asur to eat and not asur bahana. Then the Mishnah says v'teris, terufa, this minced teris fish, since they take off the skins and scales and they slice it up into very, small pieces, and then they put treifa fish, tummy fish in there, into that mixture. So since you can't tell, so then you shouldn't buy it from a guy. Vitzir, fish brine, she'ein bo daga kilbis. Fish brine you could buy from a guy, but you have to make sure that there's these creatures crawling in the fish brine, called daga kilbis, because kosher fish brine, daga kilbis will float around in there. These are natural growing live organisms that crawl around in fish brine. But if it was non-kosher fish brine, then it wouldn't sprout forth this kilbis thing. V'achilek, and chilek is a fish, kosher small fish, that they fish it out before it grows fins and scales. It's going to grow fins and scales, but they fish it out. But that swims along with this fish is some non-kosher fish, and they fish it all out together, and they don't separate it. So when you buy the chilek, you might be buying also some non-kosher fish. Then the Mishnah says, v'koiret shel chitis, a slice of this chiltis. Chiltis is a sharp fruit. Now, the question is that maybe if you can't buy slices of it, because when the guy uses his non-kosher knife to slice this chiltis will draw out from the knife let's say the bad food that's in the knife, the trephus in the knife, even though the knife may be more than 24 hours old, but the chiltis draws it out and even gives improves, enhances that taste. So the chiltis becomes also because of the knife. And finally, the Mishnah says, umelech shal kondis, salt, a special Roman salt that they used, that the rich people had, and they used to put wine in there. Hare elu, it's not for sure. Hare elu surin, all these things that we mentioned, cholavakim and all that, you're not allowed to eat it. The eini surin isar no, but it's not asur bahana. So tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem, we'll start off with the Gemara.
I tell you something